The nature of conflicts in Africa has greatly changed over the years. According to the UN, up to 90% of casualties in contemporary conflicts are civilians, mostly women and children. Conflicts or wars arise when two or more groups believe their interests are incompatible. However, conflict is not in itself a negative phenomenon, because non-violent conflict can be an essential component of social change and development, and is a necessary foundation for human interaction. In today's video, we shall be looking at the ongoing tussles over one of Africa's greatest rivers that could lead to an eventual war if appropriate measures are not taken. Hit the like button and keep watching this video till the end, and you won't regret anything afterwards. The river we are talking about is no other than the Nile River in Egypt, that also runs across some 11 countries in northern Africa. There is a current dispute over the waters of the Nile River between Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, which is only part of the problems on the Nile we shall be looking at today. Without the Nile River, Egypt would have been a totally desert country. Every aspect of life in Egypt depends on this river, as it provides food and resources, land for agriculture, acts as a means of transportation, and other large-scale endeavors. The Nile River is unarguably the largest in the world, at 6,650 kilometers long. It runs through Tanzania, DR Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. The Nile River state's population in 2023 is estimated at 450 million inhabitants, and more than half of this number depend on the Nile River for daily water supply. The UN estimates that the population of the 11 countries around the Nile River will be double by 2050, and this change might be accompanied by water scarcity and other climate change-related events. That was just an introductory phase into today's video. Now let us dive into why and how the Nile River might cause the greatest war in Africa. The long-standing dispute. You just heard me list countries that are very close to the Nile River and depend so much on it for economic survival. These countries have been trying to enhance a just and fair exploitation of this water body through the signing of treaties and agreements. However, Ethiopia refuses to recognize these agreements due to its colonial context and unaltered bias against Ethiopian war rights. Disputes between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan over the Nile River water rights started many years back and even culminated into outright tensions in 1978, following Ethiopia's proposal to construct a dam on the Blue Nile. This idea was not a good one to the Egyptians, which ultimately led to the project's failure. Today, tensions over the construction of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam are very high, and there are fears that if appropriate measures are not taken, something very remarkable might happen in the African continent in years ahead. It is often said that Egypt is the Nile, and the Nile is Egypt. These words were used from the time of Egyptian civilization and are still valid today. The geographical location of the Nile River beside the Sahara Desert has brought great benefits to Egyptians for many years now. For other places around the Nile like Tigris, Euphrates, and Indus, the desert provides a dense layer of geographical defense against any hostile invaders. As you can see, the Nile is universally important to Egypt. The river and all the water that flows through it does not begin in Egypt. Before the river even reaches Egypt, it stretches wide, thousands of kilometers through 10 other countries. The river has no true single starting place, but it's primarily fed by the Blue Nile and the White Nile, which are its primary tributaries. The Blue Nile is part of the Nile River that flows from the Ethiopian highlands, while the White Nile is that coming from Sudan. Ethiopia has often wanted to use her geographical contribution of the Nile to enrich herself and enhance prosperity. In 1929, shortly after independence, Egypt signed a treaty with Britain, her former colonial master, which aimed at maintaining her stance over the waters. Egypt will still sign another accord, if a chance arises, because truly, without the Nile River, we won't be talking about Egypt today. In 2010, when Ethiopia announced its intention to build the largest and most expensive hydroelectric dam in Africa, Egypt and Sudan treated the proposal so lightly and called for the AU's intervention on the matter, pleading with them to preserve the historical rights of both countries on the river. Meanwhile, in 2014, Sudan declared its neutrality on Nile disputes, and since then, negotiations between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan continue to no avail. The latest round of negotiations reached a stalemate in August 2020 when the Sudanese Minister of Water Resources and Irrigation stated that the continuation of negotiations in this current form will not lead to achieving practical results. What's really behind the conflict over the Nile River? For many years now, the world's longest river, the Nile, has continued facing a protracted conflict, pitting Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan against one another. As you already noticed, they all rely heavily on this water, even as mediated talks collapse. The situation is exacerbated by the three countries' belief that they are entitled to a bulk of the river's share. While Egypt claims that it has historical rights to the Nile, having interacted the most with it, Ethiopia insists that the tributaries of the Nile and up to 85% of its water originate from the country. On the other hand, Sudan insists that it has an equal claim to the water due to its strategic location between Egypt and Ethiopia. In fact, the Nile Agreement signed in 1929 between Egypt and Britain sought to give Egypt exclusive rights to the Nile waters and the authority to inspect any water-related projects touching on Nile upstream that will affect its flow downstream. Another agreement was signed in 1959, this time around, between Egypt and Sudan to allocate 3/4 of the water volume to Egypt and leaving the remainder to Sudan. The agreement allowed Egypt to build the Aswan Dam to generate electricity and to carry out irrigation. Other countries of the Nile Basin, led by Ethiopia, criticized these agreements, arguing that they were still colonized during this period, and therefore did not have the chances to present their cases. As we speak, the Ethiopians are almost rounding off the construction of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, dubbed GERD, on the Nile River. According to some observers, the long-running dispute on the GERD is more than just about physical resources. This construction project, currently carried out by Ethiopia, is a non-consumptive hydropower type, which has further complicated the relationship between Ethiopia and Egypt, two states that respectively framed the project as a matter of necessity, yet an existential threat. The conflict between Egypt and Ethiopia does not revolve only around physical resources, but goes far into their identities. Although Ethiopia sees this project as a means of development, the Egyptian government regards it as a security-based political project. If you are getting more interested in watching this video, then give it a like and subscribe to the New Tourist channel to become part of our community before we continue. Despite the different assertions people have on this Nile River issue, it is clear that the quest of the conflicting parties to maintain ontological security or preservation of state identity are driving factors for the Nile dispute. Cairo even securitized the whole issue in 2011 when Ethiopia launched the dam construction project. More fears escalated 2 years later when Ethiopia actually started constructing the dam on a ground believed by some Egyptians to be the Red Line. This conflict over identity between Egypt and Ethiopia stretches beyond their territorial boundaries. For Ethiopia, the dam is framed as an African project. Since the river is shared by about 11 African countries, it is believed by some to support Africa's green transition. On the other hand, Egypt explains the same development as representing a threat to Arab water security. At a cost of almost $5 billion, the Renaissance Dam is a huge endeavor for a poor country. Some of the hopes may be far-fetched, but it is envisaged that the project will generate over 6,000 megawatts of power when completed. In August 2022, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed of Ethiopia announced that the third filling of the megadam was completed. He added that the Nile is a gift from God to Ethiopia to make use of. Addis Ababa is showing contentment, as this project will enable the distribution of electricity to its population of more than 110 million inhabitants. The lack of success of the U.S.'s mediation efforts makes it clear once again that the conflict over the use of the Nile water has reached a dead end. Hypothetically speaking, the Egyptian High Command could radically authorize fighter jet bombers and other crews to fly across the country and land on Sudan's airspace, which will likely be friendly to such an operation, and then strike the Kurd in Ethiopia. Ethiopians do not have many arms compared to the Egyptian forces, who are more modern and capable, that is, in case war should be the last resort. However, Egypt will receive massive retaliation from Arab countries if such a thing happens, and a $5 billion dam will be destroyed after Ethiopia's hard toil on it. What are the ways forward to the Nile conflict, which could lead to a great war? Despite previous talks, the point of contentment has not yet been reached. However, some persons concerned about the whole Nile conflict have proposed strategies which could mitigate the problem. To solve the conflict peacefully, mediation and facilitation by neighboring countries and international bodies should not just be a necessity, but a language of all times till everything works. A compensation method is also being proposed in case attempts to resolve the conflict do not work out. This might facilitate negotiations amongst the conflicting parties, who will, in turn, compensate each other's losses. If you are a lover of peace, then you should be adding your voice to make sure that the crisis over the Nile River between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan comes to an end. Let us know what you think about this video by dropping your view in the comment section. The conflict over the Nile River is more than a regional battle over steel, concrete, and water. It is one of the many conflicts on the Horn of Africa, and has a long-standing engagement of international actors, as you just watched a while ago. For the moment, what seems like good news over this conflict is the fact that after years of browbeating by his predecessors, Egypt's president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, seems intent on reaching an accommodation with Ethiopia over the Nile before his term of office comes to an end. If he is serious, it could be a new beginning for comprehensive agreements on sharing the waters of the Nile amongst all countries near it. However, if this is not the case, then the filling of the reservoir, being the Renaissance Dam, which is almost being completed, could be the most dangerous flashpoint on a river with no laws. We hope you learned something new from this video, or you simply added meaning to what you already know. Please do not go yet if you haven't liked this video and subscribed to the New Tourist channel, where we bring you just the best about Africa and the world. Stay tuned for more videos, and see you next time.